What's the deal with fishing in video games? Like, really? Is fishing any fun? Today, we're diving into the world of video game fishing to explore how we can make this mundane activity into a more enjoyable experience for players. Welcome to my devlog number 1. Emerald Isle is my work-in-progress game that takes place on the east coast of the United States. I'm going to be basing many elements off my childhood home, a small coastal town, while adding fantastical elements as I see fit. The game will be centered around a small town of villagers that you can experience life with, like in Stardew Valley, but there will be more of an emphasis on combat and adventure than farming. I'm going to create a fishing mechanic inspired by one of my favorite games, Stardew Valley. I started by setting up the scene with a basic character block and adding some lava for the player to fish in. Next, I created the objects for our fishing minigame. I made basic rectangles to represent the bobber and the fish. The bobber moves up when the player clicks, and I added a cool bounce effect when it hits the bottom. Meanwhile, the fish moves back and forth at a random speed and length to avoid being caught. To make the fish movement more realistic, I added acceleration. Now, it's really starting to feel like we're fishing. I tweaked the gameplay mechanics by making clicking start the game, instead of having it on by default. I also added a progress bar to track how close a fish is to being caught. If the bar empties, the fish escapes, but if it fills all the way up, the fish is caught. Using my middle school level art skills, I designed graphics in Sprite and added them to the game, bringing our fishing minigame to life. But wait, there's more. I'm not stopping there. Next up, I added a unique challenge in the form of lava bubbles that can burn your rod. These bubbles randomly spawn at the bottom and rise to the top. If a bubble passes over the bobber, the progress bar drains quicker than usual. To give players a visual cue, the progress bar turns red while this is happening. There are many factors that determine the type of experience a player receives when fishing in a game. These include things like how long it takes to catch a fish, the rewards from fishing, and the actual mechanism of catching a fish. What I believe is the most important factor is the atmosphere surrounding the fishing. Meet Fisherman Phil, our player character. He's just filler art for now until I design the character customization system in a future devlog, so his name and look don't matter all that much. I tried generating names on ChatGPT, and while the name Rogic the Reeler strikes fear into the hearts of not only man, but gods as well, I wasn't the biggest fan. So, for now, let's stick with Phil. Sorry to interrupt, but can we get a like and subscribe for Phil the Fisherman? Also, comment below your favorite game to fish in. At this stage, I decided to keep things simple to avoid creating animations for the player, and instead I made him rotate to show direction as the player moves. Now, onto the casting mechanic. When the player clicks, a power bar is displayed. Once the player releases the mouse, the power from the bar is transferred into the bobber that is thrown out from the player. Once the bobber lands, the player must wait for a fish to bite. This happens at a random time within an interval, and then the fishing minigame pops up. There are a few issues with the current implementation. There's no fishing line, and the bobber can land anywhere, but that's not what's important right now. We'll have to revisit this later in the video. With the casting mechanic in place, somewhat, it's time to introduce the stars of the show, the fish. I started by creating a text box that pops up after a catch is completed, displaying an image of the fish caught. This was heavily inspired by Stardew Valley, but I do plan to create my own unique designs in future iterations. This text box will also show the name and size of the fish later on. Each type of fish will have its own unique movement pattern, catch speed, and other variables that will become important as we further develop the game. The first fish players can catch is called the lava fish. This beginner difficulty fish prefers to stay near the top, and it moves back and forth fairly slowly. Next up, I created the bonefish. This agile swimmer is quicker than the lava fish, moving back and forth, staying towards the center, and accelerating faster than its fiery counterpart. Lastly, I added a third fish into the mix, the obsidian flounder. This fish moves for longer durations, but accelerates slowly and tends to stay near the bottom of the tank. I will of course be adding more fish, and water, and lava, but that will be for future devlogs and content updates. At this point, I was tired of Phil spinning, so I created a basic walk animation for him. Additionally, I made a script that draws a line between the player and the bobber, acting as a fishing line. I attempted to create a casting mechanic that slows down until it stops, but later realized it was the wrong approach. Nonetheless, I implemented it to work in all directions. I created a cast animation and attached the fishing line to the end of the rod. Despite encountering some small issues, I managed to fix them and ensure consistency in the character's animation throughout the fishing action. I developed a randomization function for selecting a random fish from a group, allowing for different areas with different fish probabilities. Text bubbles were implemented to display the name and a random size for each fish. The size distribution was based on a bell curve function I found online, providing realism to the fishing experience. This means that an average-sized fish is much more likely than an extra large one, or an extra small one, just like the sizes of things in real life. If you're interested in math things like this, I recommend doing your own research into the topic. A QuickTime event was introduced when a fish takes the bait, signaled by an exclamation mark over the player's head. The player must click to start the fishing minigame when this happens. If the player clicks too early, the bobber is pulled back in and no fish is caught. I added a new animation for when the player is fighting a fish, enhancing Phil's prowess regardless of the animation quality. I made some simple tiles for the game to avoid looking at a blank blue background for any longer, but the lava still looked bad. I decided to go with a simplistic look for this iteration, and came up with some passable placeholder art. This will not be the final look of the game, and I will have to create more art later on. I think it's finally time for me to address the casting issue. I applied an upwards velocity to the bobber when casting horizontally, with gravity pulling it back down. This adjustment created a more realistic arc trajectory, enhancing the fishing experience. Despite this change, the cast still adheres to the strength of the power bar, albeit with a unique twist. The problem I had was that higher powered casts would go significantly farther than low powered ones. This was because the velocity upwards and the horizontal velocity were both edited. To fine-tune the casting mechanics, I utilized a logarithmic function that I had created while messing around on Desmos. This function alters the behavior of lower strength casts, bringing them closer to the maximum strength than they would be otherwise. This adjustment ensures a smoother and more intuitive casting experience across different power levels. Next, I turned my attention to casting downwards. I began a new animation and designing a fresh movement path for the bobber. The bobber now initiates its trajectory by ascending upwards first, before descending with gravity into position for fishing. This revised approach creates a visually appealing arc effect, closely resembling the motion of casting a real fishing rod. Finally, I tackled the last cast direction, upward. I created a walk animation for Fisherman Phil, facing backwards. Along with the various fishing animations, the bobber now launches upwards, mimicking a high arc before descending to its intended spot. This final adjustment ensures consistency across all cast directions. I gotta say, I think the fishing mechanic is finally starting to feel complete. At the start of the video, I asked the question, is fishing fun? After the development process for actually creating the mechanic, I realized that so much more goes into fishing than what first meets the eye, and I gotta say, I enjoyed making it. So does this mean that fishing is fun? Well, no. As a standalone mechanic, it kinda sucks, but that's okay. In my future devlogs, I will hopefully turn this boring task into something exciting. Maybe you'll fish up an all-powerful leviathan that you must fight to the death to protect your home? Who knows? You'll just have to subscribe and click that bell to find out what happens next.